With years of adversity under their belts, today's supply chain leaders have earned their stripes. First, the tariffs, then the pandemic, and now a world challenged with warfare on multiple fronts. Suppliers have their work cut out for them. Luckily, new technologies like AI are stepping into the breach to solve previously intractable challenges in new, dynamic ways. How so? Check out this episode of Future Proof to find out.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Folks, we have an all-star cast lined up for you today. I'm very excited. This is the first of a three-part series of a pilot called The Foundry. And we've got the founder of The Foundry on the call right now. CEO Neal Hansch is with us today. And also we've got Alex Freed from Schematic Ventures. And we have Suketu Gandhi from A.T. Kearney, a supply chain expert. So let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves real quick. Neal Hansch, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining the fray. Pretty hot topic these days. What do you think?
No question. And Eric, thanks again for having me back on the show, and excited for the conversation. Just to provide the quick overview of Foundry, right? We were a business started 10 years ago. We were acquired by Kearney last summer, and our core business is helping the Fortune 1000 navigate external innovation, and seeing, increasingly over the years, looking to understand what is happening with all of these emerging companies the world over. Doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, or where these large Fortune 1000 players are based. But to your point, figure out what's happening. And one of the through lines of all the corporates we work with, supply chain. And so, it is a universal importance. It has been particularly interesting over the last few years, which we'll get into over the course of this show. But thank you again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex Freed dialing in, tell us a bit about yourself and what your role is in the world of supply chain.
Absolutely. And Eric, also want to thank you for having me on the show, and excited to be here with Neal and Suketu today. So I'm a partner at Schematic Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital fund based in San Francisco, and we are sector focused. So we invest in all things industrial technology related, in particular, companies building in the areas of supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, transportation, decarbonization. So a lot of fun stuff going on in that world. We invest in brand new companies. So we see founders at the very beginning of their journey, sometimes at the ideation stage, and get to kind of see the latest and greatest of all the new technologies that folks are thinking about as applied to these categories.
That's a lot of fun. That's a cool place to be. Years ago, I spent, I guess, about 5 or 6 years on the advisory board for the South by Southwest Innovator. They had an accelerator program, basically, which was all about new companies coming out. And so it's kind of the same thing, right? I get to judge the different applicants, and it was all about learning like what the cutting edge is. What are people working on right at the razor's edge? That's a cool place to be. And last but not least, Suketu Gandhi from A.T. Kearney. You've written a book about supply chain. What's the title of the book?
Well, the title of the book should have been Things Are Changing Fast. You need to know how to deal with them. But the publisher said, hey, you know what, that may not sell. So what we're doing is really talking about supply chains and what are the fundamental principles in this dramatically changing world. And how do you act today? How do you act tomorrow? And more importantly, how do you plan for day after tomorrow, where things could have even more variability in the way, the various crises, but also opportunities. There's a lot of talk on crises, but I think there should be even more talk on the opportunities that are coming as a result of these disruptions.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I recall learning years ago that the Chinese character for chaos is very, very similar to the Chinese character for opportunity, because out of chaos, there's tremendous opportunity, right? And you look at the world now, and it's funny. So we talked before the show. I've got some background in supply chain, and supply chain is probably the most complex space in business. I mean, absent maybe life sciences or something, if you really get into the human genome and things of that nature. But supply chain is so complicated because there are so many interdependencies. There are so many branches. There are so many bits of details about way people capture information. I'm a data guy, so I think in terms of how you persist data, it's very difficult to even show a supply chain to any meaningful depth because, for an automobile, how many parts go into an automobile? Thousands of parts and all these suppliers. And what's interesting, and I'll throw it back to you, Suketu, is that we had fair warning before COVID because we had all those tariffs. And I remember that was tremendously disruptive. I'm a cyclist, and you could not get a bike part for like a year, all through whatever it was, 2018 or something like that into 2019. You could not get bicycle parts because they were all in China, and we couldn't get them because of the tariffs. So it's like we had advanced warning, and then COVID hit, and then post-COVID. So we're in a very strange place right now. But what's your take on how to navigate through that? How do you advise your clients to just get a handle and make sure you're moving in the right direction?
So to start with, you were lucky you actually had a bike because bicycles were really hot during COVID.
Right.
And then the parts that go with that. So the way I wanted to kind of put a simple definition of what are supply chains, right? Supply chains are a mechanism where you deliver products and services that a customer wants, and then you bring in your internal resources, your factories, your distribution centers, your planning people, and your suppliers together to deliver it where they want it, when they want it, how they want it, and for a fair price. So supply chain is what I would call the heart of the business combined with the stomach, if you may, to make it very simple. So that's a really important part. Now, what happens is anytime there is a small bit of disruption, for a long period of time, supply chains were broken down into silos. That said, you're a product guy, so you think about products. You're a guy who plans what should be made. You're a guy who distributes. You're a gal who manufactures, and you're here in somebody in procurement who deals with the suppliers. And everything was broken down into silos because we were in a game, or we ever fooled into a world that said everything will work as it's supposed to work.
Right.
We know that doesn't happen. So one of the big things we are talking about are, one, think about this end to end. And second, you said something really important, Eric, which is think about the data. Because the data it gives is the one that gives you the light to understand what is happening in the whole end-to-end world.
Right.
And the latest view is there are two factories in the world: the AI factory, as Jensen Huang called them, and then the second one is factories that produce things. And bring them together, and you have the supply chain of tomorrow, in simple words.
Yeah, that's fascinating because with AI, we can do lots of different, very powerful things, like predict, for example. I mean, and just to give some background to the audience, as a procurement person, obviously you've got your bill of materials that you need to supply to your warehouse, to your manufacturing plant, et cetera. And being able to see who has which part and also how reliable those people are, because that's one of the key factors, right? Is understanding reliability over time. It's like, okay, XYZ provider has a better price, but are they reliable? Well, let's take a look. If you have the data and you can build a baseline, then even in difficult times, you can predict, well, maybe they're not. Maybe we should just pay more and make sure we get that, right? It's always a balancing act. But the thing is, with the data and with the trained algorithms, and they have to be trained and they have to be focused and very on point. But if you have that, then you can do a much better job of managing this end-to-end process. And that's where the magic is, right?
That is absolutely where the magic is. So the old days, we used to follow what we would call the plan and pray model. You plan for something and pray like heck that the products would be ready.
Right.
But the world we are in, that my friend Neal and I work a lot on, is we call it a sense and pivot world, which is you're constantly sensing what's happening on the demand side. You're constantly sensing what's happening within your four walls. You're sensing what's happening on the supply side. And depending on the situation, you pivot. And you pivot. One of the complexities in supply chains is because it deals both with carbon-based life forms and silicon-based life forms. Silicon-based life forms are dependent on data and they can move quickly, whereas carbon-based take time. So you can't just open a factory. You can't move logistics networks overnight. And so now you have to create those buffers in the middle that allow you to deal with these variances along the way, both on the supply side as well as the demand side. That's why we call it sense and pivot. Yeah,
no, I like that a lot. And I'll throw one more question over you and then maybe bring you into the conversation. one of the real keys in supply chain, and I think we're making good ground these days, but you can let me know your thoughts, is having visibility not just into what you need, but into what all of your partners and suppliers have. And consumers who shop online have seen the leading indicators of this, meaning you'll be shopping for a jacket and it'll say 14 left in stock, for example.
Yeah.
There are systems of record being monitored to be able to deliver that kind of information because you're tracking the warehouse, you're tracking what's available. And so the more visibility you have into your suppliers and what their conditions are, and I mentioned, of course, the score, reliability score, but just knowing what they have and what you can get access to in a reasonable period of time, that's the key. But that's a very difficult thing to do because you need all of them to publish information in a format that you can then access and consume in your enterprise. Is that about right?
You are spot on. And what is wonderful is both consumers and B2B customers actually send indication on what they're gonna need in the next few weeks. So for example, we have trained algorithms that tell us about 12 weeks out with 94% accuracy on what somebody might buy.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is data is available, but we always look for definitive data. That means, is it 100% accurate? And the reality is it doesn't need to be. I need to apply statistical tools to them to understand what is the probability of something happening. And that is a significant mindset shift. So I can deal with partial data. Data may not be perfect, but at least it's a wonderful indicator. And that is a significant mindset shift from the old days where we said everything had to be perfect.
Right.
It doesn't have to be.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point you just made. I'm reminded of Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, is it in the box? Is it out of the box? And I explained to people, like, for sure, in a real world, it's either in the box or out of the box, okay? There's no way it's in and out of the box. But for purposes of developing probabilistic algorithms and determinations, that's why you talk about it being maybe in the box, maybe outside of the box. But you make an excellent point. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want a high score. I want it to be like 90% or higher to be able to make my plans because things change, to your point. I mean, I was joking with, not really joking, but talking with Neal before the show about Houthis having hypersonic missiles firing at ships in the Red Sea. Like, who saw that coming? Anyone have that in their bingo card for this year? Not me. So you're right that you don't have to be perfect, but you do want to have the data, you do want to score the data, and then adjust it over time. Real quick final comment that I'll bring Neal in. Go ahead, Suketu.
No, I think that's a great way to think about it, right? Schrodinger's cat, whether it's alive or dead, really depends on the data. And now we have sensors, for example, that allow you to connect everything from where the product is being used. What do the trucks say? What do the factories tell us? And what is happening at your suppliers? So, Schrodinger's cat today would be fully instrumented, and we would use that information to drive our supply chains.
That's a quote. I love that. Talking to an all-star cast of supply chain experts. We heard from Neal Hansch and Suketu Gandhi in the opening segment. And now up next, Alex Freed. Alex, you're out there in the front lines trying to figure out where are the hot takes, who has the right technology. And, I guess the blessing and curse of the whole supply chain world is that there is an embarrassment of riches and opportunities, right? I mean, you have everything from the data collection, the instrumentation, and I think probably the hardest nut to crack is the orchestration of all that data, being able to bake policies in and rules and preferences and other such things to manage the data, because how do you even visualize this stuff? And what's interesting to me is no one seems to have really dominated the IoT space. I don't see any player who really owns everything. All the big guys have some skin in the game, but no one really owns it yet. But Alex, what do you see out there, and where are you focused?
Well, as it relates to IoT, we definitely saw a large wave of new companies building IoT-related devices with, let's say, predictive analytics, looking at predictive maintenance, or perhaps to be able to track goods and provide visibility into where they are during transportation. So, a sensor that goes on a parcel or a pallet or inside of a container, or whatever the case may be. I think what we found there is, one, a lot of value that those are providing, in particular for high value machines or high value goods. So for example, those sensors found that, let's say, if it was high value electronics or perhaps things like jewelry or precious metals or even pharmaceuticals, which in that case are also temperature sensitive and sensitive to other things, tons of value. But as you get down to other types of goods that are perhaps less valuable in and of themselves, it was hard to justify the ROI for companies. So I think that's always been a potential friction point of, even though the technology is amazing and we'd love to have that, how much does it cost and what is the ROI related to it? One just example on that end is, in the warehouse, people wanted to put better tags and trackers on every single item, but at the end of the day, barcodes are still what everyone uses because they're super cheap.
Right.
So that's kind of on the IoT side of the world. And then I think one of your questions as well was, what are we seeing now in terms of new technology and new companies being founded? And I think, to no surprise to anyone here, seeing a lot around LLMs and generative AI. And I think in particular where we've seen that type of AI used to great effect is as it relates to collaboration across multiple parties. So we know supply chains are highly fragmented, multi-agent systems, and today the common denominator for collaboration across the parties is still email, phone, text, WhatsApp, WeChat, kind of all these more traditional or horizontal methodologies. And we've seen in the past companies, let's say, create a supplier portal where the supplier has to come in and interact with that portal such that that communication then flows to the brand or the manufacturer, the OEM, and everything theoretically lives within that platform. But in reality, that supplier might have 10 clients they're working with 10 different platforms, or perhaps the engagement on that platform is infrequent, and so they forget about it and things go out of date. But one really valuable application I think we've been seeing of LLMs and generative AI is the fact that it can interpret emails, put them into your system, and then communicate back to folks. And it's also an area where the cost of mistakes is relatively low. Like if you screw up a little bit on an email or something along those lines, usually it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not making a decision that is hypercritical, especially without a human in the loop for oversight. And so when we look at that, part of what we think about then is we know that this technology is really effective with these modes of communication to both ingest them and then also draft something back out to communicate or automate that communication. And so what is the workflow that this company is putting together around that core technology such that it fits with the users on both sides? And to what extent do they understand the real life workflow of this customer base in order to make sure that the technology is used to the highest degree of effectiveness?
Yeah, that's very, very interesting stuff. I love that you brought in LLMs to consume emails and then parse, because one of the really cool things these engines can do is to summarize and to just serve as an agent with which you can communicate. So basically, you can have every email coming in absorbed by the LLM and also going to its target, so you get the target. But you know what I found? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Alex. AI is very, very good at reminding people or making suggestions about things. And I think that's where probably 80% of AI's impact will take place, is in suggestions. So you're in your console, you're doing your job of procurement, and ding, a little message comes up that says, hey, we just saw an email from Bangalore and they're suggesting that this product is delayed. Do you want to use the other supplier, for example? And the user will go, well, gosh darn, yeah, I will. Click yes. And then, of course, every time you do that, you're helping the model train, theoretically. What do you think about that, Alex?
I agree. Definitely a lot of applications as it relates to making suggestions for the user or for the end customer there. One creative example that we've seen a company mention or be interested in is you have an organization with, let's say, 10, 20, 100 operations folks who have their own suppliers or their own clients who they're speaking to. And there could be a supply chain shock or an event. Perhaps it's like a weather-related event happening in Chicago that's going to affect multiple customers or multiple modes of transportation. But me as an individual operator, I only have 3 clients or 3 partners that would be impacted. But my company probably has 100. And if someone starts getting a few pings or a few emails, then because this AI agent or system has visibility across everyone's communication, everyone's emails, it can recommend to me to say, hey, by the way, we noticed other people in your organization are seeing this. You may want to proactively reach out to your partners or your customers and get ahead of this. So one interesting, I think, example of this type of AI suggesting things that in a timely manner that we've seen that could be quite effective and very interesting across the organization, bridging together people who have kind of point visibility and combining it all together.
Yeah, that is an absolutely huge deal. And maybe Suketu, I'll bring you back into the conversation here to comment on this. One of the best things I've heard about AI is to treat it like a team member, essentially, and realize that it is an active force in the organization. Of course, you have to set it up properly, you have to manage it. All these things are kind of requirements. But nonetheless, as Alex just suggested here, if you set it up right, it has access to all these emails going around, so it can sense patterns that are occurring right now and give you feedback and say, hey, maybe you should jump on this. It looks like this is going to impact you as well. What do you think about that as a go forward strategy to at least start investigating how to use these kinds of technologies? Because once you live in a world where you're getting those recommendations, it's really hard to go back to the darkness. What do you think?
No, I think that is very well put, what Alex said and the way you surmised it. But I'll give you a practical example. We are using LLMs with the RAGs to understand what is happening in the world of some of the complex logistics procurement. The LLM might think that, hey, a load is a load. It might think of a financial load or things of that sort. But the moment you add a RAG on top, it tells you, hey, in this context, a load is the goods you put on a truck. Right. And then you take that information, and now you have the massive ability to take all of that information and apply heuristics and logistics against that. Because you have a data set that is being collected over the last 20, 30, 40 years of time in terms of, reliability, cost, impact, things of that sort. And now you can say, here are the recommended actions, if you may. The second thing you talked about was agents, and it's really important. And I had a conversation with a CHRO of a very large company. They have a couple of 100,000 people. Said, do you start thinking about your agents as actual employees? Because if you do, then you will start thinking about evaluating their actions, understanding their actions, and modifying them based on what they do good and areas that need improvement. Because that's a different way about thinking about this new technology that comes in. And it brings together the concept we call the whole brain. That is, human intelligence plus artificial intelligence should be the brain of the enterprise, versus thinking of them separately. And that's where the power we think is going to be unlocked over the next 3 to 5 years in a massive way.
Yeah, I have to agree. And maybe, Alex, I'll throw it back over to you. Figuring out how and where to deploy these kinds of technologies, that's one of the biggest challenges. Figuring out which vendors should be on your short list for a particular space is a big consideration as well. But I almost think that at this point in time, changing minds and opening minds is a big part of the conversation. And these LLMs, from what I've seen, I've been in this business a long time, these LLMs have absolutely opened the eyes of business leaders. They now see, oh, wow, we really should be focused on this stuff. It's kind of like cloud was 10 years ago. I thought cloud was going to take off like 20 years ago. And it took about 10 years longer than I thought. And then all of a sudden it just started really going in full steam. And I think a big part of that is a guy named Satya Nadella from Microsoft, who somehow managed to pivot this aircraft carrier in a different direction in a pretty short period of time. And I think we're in that big of a pivot, speaking back to this concept of pivot, right? Sense and pivot. I think organizations have got to start pivoting to really understanding that these AI technologies are the game changers. And if you don't investigate them, you're going to be in big trouble. What do you think, Alex?
No, I 100% agree. And I think there's two elements of that. One is the leadership of an organization needs to be forward thinking and thinking about how to apply technology within their business. And obviously, Neal and Suketu do a lot of work with those corporations to help them structure their thinking around that aspect of it. And then the other part that we like to consider as well is then the implementation of that technology. And part of that comes back to, Eric, I think what you mentioned, you have different technology vendors and which one is going to work better for a particular organization, right? So, we're talking a lot about LLMs. One example in the physical world, you would see sometimes, let's say a small factory or a machine shop, they would want to adopt robotics and it'd be kind of a top-down initiative, and they would get a robot and everyone's very excited about it. And then once the executives go away and everyone goes back to producing the goods that they were producing, the robot is kind of pushed into a corner and forgotten about because it wasn't really implemented well, and it wasn't running as well as expected. Perhaps there was a lot of issues with the way it was integrated into the line, or perhaps the other folks, the people working there didn't trust it for one reason or another, and then it just gets wheeled out again when the executives come back in. So how do you avoid that, not just with a physical robot, but also with some of these AI-related tools? And I think a lot of it comes down to ensuring that the way that they are implemented is truly valuable to the people who are going to interact with them, and also is done with an understanding of their actual day-to-day work, right? It's not trying to force them into a structure that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit the realities of that industry or of that, whatever function that AI agent is operating in, but very critical to actually fit in with the way that these people do their work and provide value to them, to promote that engagement and make sure it's not just sitting in the corner and wheeled out when they want to show it off to someone, and then it goes right back in that corner.
No, that's exactly right. And we only have 2 minutes left in this segment, but as you were talking, and this is what I love about doing these shows with smart people like we have on the show today, I have these epiphanies about things, and there's something I'm going to tease this subject. And Suketu, I want you to just offer a quick answer, and then in the next segment, let's dive into this. I'll tell you something that's going to be very compelling. I sense this. You can tell me if I'm wrong. There has been for years and years this IT-OT divide, right? Information technology, operational technology. And very few people know how to bridge those two worlds, but I'll bet a smart AI engine can figure out how to bridge those two worlds, because LLMs can write not just in English and French and Spanish, they can write in COBOL, they can write in Java, they can write in C# and C++. Do you see, you got like 60 seconds, do you see LLMs playing a significant role in fusing finally these worlds of OT and IT communications?
Well, so potato is what it used to be with IT and OT, and both of them thought that they were special, to be transparent. LLMs will play an important role, but there are even simpler technologies, right? Like you talked about, Eric, in the past, of, hey, how do you get the underlying data in a simple, cohesive manner so that allows you to interpret it through a machine very easily? So that's where the biggest help is going to come. IT and OT was the real terms, a false dichotomy created, because that's where the work was being done, right? I work on the machine floor, so I am OT. I work on the planning side, so I am IT, but it's all a supply chain. And the way we break it down is with this end-to-end silo, and LLMs can help there. 60 seconds.
Okay, that was excellent.